Hi, I'm Jesse with Canine Perspective, and in this video we're going to cover, does e-collar make my dog worse or more aggressive? A very common question that we get, especially since we work with tools like prong collar and e-collar, which are aversive tools. And whenever we think of aversives, or when we look at these tools or think of these tools, people tend to go to like worst case scenario, or they tend to go, oh, you just use that to, like, you max out the power and just punish the dog. And yes, you can do that, but that's not how we approach things. We always want to make sure that the dog understands the e-collar as a communicator. And then from there, we see what does just standard discipline with obedience help address. And then typically we get residual behavior, and then that residual behavior most likely will need to be corrected directly for the behavior itself, okay? But in terms of, does the e-collar make dogs worse? In my opinion, the answer is no. It can make dogs worse if you are not using it correctly, if you're not conditioned it correctly. That's a separate issue, okay? But when the dog understands the e-collar as a communicator, how it turns on, how it turns off, it's not making the dog worse. We're doing one of two things. One, if you have an anxious dog, for example, your dog's stress response is anxiety, okay, or their emotional stress response is anxiety. E-collar is a stressor. So if we're training with the e-collar, we are proactively putting the dog under stress as we're training, and we will look like what seems like more anxiety because the dog is going under more stress, okay, through the training process. By working the dog through these things, we actually build their tolerance to stress and help them learn how to handle stress and healthier ways of handling stress, okay? If you don't expose your dog and then work them through stress, your dog's not going to get any better, okay? And trying to shield them and or avoid stressors is not realistic. You cannot control the world. You can turn the corner and there's a dog, and that can stress your dog out. So if your dog is unable to handle other stressors, trying to get them to handle that particular context is going to be very difficult, okay? So we're not making the dog worse. It's just that since we're training, the dog's going under stress, we're seeing more anxiety, but that eventually does go away more often than not in time and exposure, okay? The second thing is, since we're dealing with a lot of issues like reactivity, dog aggression, human aggression, separation anxiety, things like that, those are, problems, so to speak. And when we confront the problem, it can seem like it's getting worse because the dog doesn't want to give it up. Okay, so for example, if I'm working with a leash reactive dog, and we've already done all the precursor stuff, all the precursor foundation, leading up to, okay, we now need to correct the dog for the behavior itself. If the dog begins to redirect, meaning go after the handler or the leash, we're not making the dog worse. We're simply confronting this reactivity problem by correcting the dog for the behavior, and the dog does not want to give up the reactivity. So then they begin to redirect, nipping and biting at the closest things, trying to outlet this frustration, okay? So we're not making things worse, we're simply confronting issues. And if we don't confront them fully, the dog then learns that these options are always available to them. So we have to confront the problem, address the problem, work through the problem, work through the increased anxiety or the increased frustration or redirected aggression, all that stuff. We have to work through all that in order for the dog to learn, okay, how I'm handling this is not good. And then if I choose to handle it this way, that's also not good because I'm getting more of what I don't want. But the moment I stop that stuff, everything disappears and everything is okay. Okay, we need the dog to go through that process in order for them to learn, like, oh, you know what, I don't need to redirect. And if I do redirect, there's going to be a consequence. Oh, I don't need to become anxious. And if I do become anxious, there's going to be a consequence. It's repetition and exposure. Okay, but it's very important that the dog does understand what the e-collar is. I have come into situations where the dog owner was already training the dog on an e-collar of their own theory, right? Again, and a human's first instinct is, oh, this thing is bad. So I'm going to make sure that I correct my dog at the worst or at the highest level that there is. So I get clients, especially if we're dealing with aggression, because aggression to the human brain is like, oh, that's really bad, right? Is I got clients who have maxed out the collar and are 127ing their dog for reactivity or, growling and all this stuff, but they've not set the foundation of the e-collar, so the dog thinks that it's happening at random. They're not tying together that the collar is turning on because of their decisions, and the level is so intense, it's so high, it's so harsh that the dog is unable to receive the information and then think, what do I need to do to prevent this in the future? Okay, which is super important. So when I come in and I assess what they're doing, I go, okay, we're gonna reset, we're gonna stop all that stuff, we're gonna start low, work our way up, find the dog's actual working number, do a couple of weeks of heel training to make sure the dog understands how the e-collar turns on and how it turns off. And then if we're still getting reactivity, well, now at least the dog has a concept of how to, what the e-collar is communicating and how to alter their decisions in order to turn the collar off, right, to turn the pressure off. And more often than not, since the dog has technically had repeated exposure already to the collar, they just didn't understand it. A lot of these things just start to disappear very quickly because the dog already has exposure, they just didn't have understanding, okay? But again, human brain goes, oh, this is supposed to be really bad, you're doing a really bad thing, so I'm gonna punish you at a really harsh level. Yes, that's sometimes we come to that approach, but that's not the approach that we start off with. We always want to make sure the dog understands the collar, okay? So it's not, again, making your dog worse. It's not making your dog more aggressive or more anxious or anything like that. It's simply your dog has stress responses, and because the tool is a stressor, we're going to see more of those stress responses. But it's super important. This is why it's super important to make sure we work through all these things so that we get to the other side so that we start to make progress and the dog starts to be more relaxed, okay? What people tend to struggle with is once they hit that messy middle, right, that part where there's all that kind of emotional stuff and the stress and everything from the dog, is a lot of times they go like, I can't get to the other side, or they'll struggle and they'll try to keep it as low as possible, not going higher to get the dog over the hump. So now the dog is stuck in this limbo and they're not making any progress because the owner is thinking that they're being nice by being lower, and I go, no, you're actually just prolonging the process. It's like a Band-Aid, just rip it off and get it done. And then once you get the dog to the side, now you're going to make real progress, okay? So short answer is no, e-collar cannot make your dog more aggressive or worse if you're doing it correctly, okay? If you're doing it without the guidance of a professional and or without proper education or understanding of what the e-collar is, yes, you can make things worse because your dog does not have understanding. I'm Jesse with Canine Perspective, and thank you for watching.